as I was saying, I'm grateful to everyone who has shown up today. Uh, and I'm really glad to have the opportunity to be here with you. Um, if you got my email yesterday, I do want to let you know that my cat is doing well. Um, and I forgot to mention that in my email yesterday. But I doing quite well. I'm very happy to say that and share that good news. Um, Second, I want to say a little bit about how the morning will flow. We'll start with a meditation. It's going to be mostly silent. There'll be light guidance, but very little. Um, and that seems, I just think that's um, appropriate given the topic of no self. Um, um, in part, I know for me because often when I'm sitting, myself arises. And so it's we'll get to have that uh, um, familiarity and perhaps insight as well. Hopefully, there will be insight. Hopefully, there'll be some occasion for insight this morning or sometime afterwards. Um, and so after the meditation, I will give a talk on no self or not self. Then there'll be mindful movement. And after mindful movement, we'll have time for discussion, question and answer. And I will say now, and I will repeat this as I begin the talk. I'm offering this topic not because I have any expertise, or uh, I'm certainly in respect to this topic, I'm a beginner. Uh, but it's something that I find really challenging and provocative and have for some time. And I want to open it up as a topic for us to consider together. And I'm uh, always um, eager to learn from the Sangha about things that I find challenging, or to learn different ways of looking at considering things. So that's what we'll be doing. And I'll go ahead and I'm going to set a timer, and we'll meditate for 20, 25 minutes. Let's say 25 minutes. And I will bring the meditation to a close with a dedication of merit. But I will begin just with the sound of my voice and the invitation to uh, find a comfortable posture, allowing yourself to come to rest, arriving in this moment. An anchor might be helpful. Now, if your attention wanders, you can bring it back to the anchor. Might be the breath, breathing in, breathing out. It might be the feeling of your hands in your lap. Your feet on the ground. Or your lips pressed together. Anchor is just a place for your attention to rest. And a place for your mind to return to if your attention wanders. I invite you now, if you wish, just to follow an inhale. And you just follow the breath from the moment the inhale begins until it's complete. And if you wish, you might then notice the moment of transition from inhaling to exhaling. I invite you now just to follow the exhalation, the releasing of the breath. Do you notice a pause at the end of the exhale before the next inhalation begins? Now the invitation is to follow a complete cycle of the breath from the initiation of inhalation to the shift from inhalation to exhalation. Then the pause after the exhalation before the next inhalation begins. This cycle, the basic rhythm of the breath, gathering in the air from around our bodies and letting it go back out into the world. gathering together, letting go, gathering, letting go. On the one hand, it's an abiding dimension of interbeing, bringing the air into the body. It makes contact with the surface of the lungs, a surface much greater than the surface of our skin, so that it's inside our bodies that we make the most contact with what surrounds us. It's essential interdependence. It's a constant reminder of our interbeing. The rhythm of gathering in and letting go is also an apt metaphor for human life and further the practice. Gathering in, absorbing what is beneficial, and letting go of the rest. Gathering in, letting go. Much of what we gather is a burden. Best to let it go. We'll bring this meditation to a close with the dedication of merit from the One Earth Sangha. May all places be held sacred. May all beings be cherished. May all injustices of oppression, devaluation, and theft be fully righted, remedied, and healed. May all who are captured by hatred be freed to the love that is our birthright. May all who are bound by fear discover the safety of understanding. May all who are weighed down by grief be given over to the joy of being. May all who are lost in delusion find a home on the path of wisdom. May all wounds to forest, deserts, rivers, oceans, all wounds to Mother Earth be lovingly restored to bountiful health. May all beings everywhere delight in whale song, bird song, and blue sky. May all beings abide in peace and well-being, awaken and be free. Namaste. So I'm want to begin my talk first by saying a little bit about this metaphor of the breath, the gathering in and the letting go. So much of what we gather in doesn't serve, isn't wholesome, but we hold on to it. And I guess one of the things I want to suggest is that process of holding on, attachment, identification really, identification with the self, that accumulation of what we've gathered is in some sense uh, the self we identify ourselves with. And I want to explore the notion of no self or not self. Because the self is often a wellspring of suffering. But also because it's a challenge, this notion of no self. And that's really, I would say, why I wanted to talk about it today. Because it's been a challenge to me, and not because I have any expertise, um, though perhaps I have some insight, but because have had developed over time a deep commitment to self. And so my talk is going to have, and I see liberation from suffering as a liberation from the self. Um, but that path of liberation is really challenging and difficult to grasp, particularly in respect to the self, it seems to me. And I will say that's because my commitment to the self is so strong, accumulated through long-standing habits. So the talk will have three parts. Um, the first is kind of personal, kind of a story about my commitment to the self, myself. And then the second part will be some concrete examples of beginner's mind or living without the encumbrance of self. And then after a discussion of beginner's mind, I will turn to right view, which is the first um, part of the Eightfold Path, the first fold, the first turn, one might say, in the path towards liberation. So let's start with the personal and my growing into a sense of self. So as a child, and I'm sure that this is common, right? I accumulated all kinds of likes and dislikes, really a veritable proliferation of preferences. What's my favorite cereal? Which toy do I want to play with? Who's my best friend? And these kinds of choices. Who do I want to avoid? What cereal don't I want? What food won't I eat? What kind of toy doesn't interest me? All these things. And then, of course, fears. I was afraid. I remember being very afraid of a neighbor's grandmother, the dogs that chased me when I rode my bike, my best friend's dad, and my own dad when he was angry. These are just some of the ways in which preferences arose, um, attachments and aversions. And just moving along, I don't know, I haven't talked a lot with people to compare identity crises, but certainly mine felt like a real crisis when I was a teenager. And it grew into this crisis, this open question of who I am and whether I'm really myself, uh, grew into a decades-long pursuit of authenticity. And all of these experiences shaped me. Uh, they informed my sense of what really matters, and they gave rise to a sense of identity, of being this particular self. And in the background of this development, I might, kind of cultural background. There are two maxims I want to share, and maybe they resonate with you. They definitely resonated with me. Know thyself. Um, that was uh, one of the comes from the Delphic Oracle speaking to Socrates. And then from Hamlet, to thine own self be true. These are imperatives to learn who the self is, right? To learn who we are and be true to ourselves. You know, wisdom, authenticity is found here. This is one of our cultural teachings, I would suggest. But there's a deeper background too, or also. And there are two powerful influences in this that I'm going to call this deep background to self that make, at least for me, um, the notion of makes the notion of self very sticky. The attachment habitual. The first of these background influences, deep background influences, is a bodily experience. And the second is language, speech, and thought. In terms of the aggregates, we might say it's material form and mental formations, but also material form and perception and feelings. That is to say, unpleasant, pleasant, neutral. So let me start with bodily experience. So I'm here intertwined with this body. And this body, my living body, it's not like any other body I experience. It's the source or gathering point of fields of sensations. I experience the world through this body. There's sight, field of vision radiating outward from my eyes. Can move my eyes or move my head to direct what I'm looking at. And then there's also hearing, right? There's a field of audible sensations that's received through the ears. And we can move our head and ears to locate sounds, or we can shift, or I'm trying to discern what I'm hearing. I can shift my attention to the sounds, away from other senses, often sight, touch, There's a field of tactile sensations experienced by my skin at the outer edge of my body. And that edge is movable, right? The edge of my skin comes in contact with different things. But it's especially movable through the hands, right? I'm thinking of how I explore dark spaces or spaces that I can't see into with my hands. And there might be some trepidation associated with that kind of exploration. But it's how I can explore what I can't see. Then there's taste, which in a certain sense is a kind of touch, right? To taste things, they have to come into contact with our tongue. So, but taste is this field of gustable sensations received by the tongue. So all these fields of sensations gathered into consciousness. So the body and consciousness located in the body, located with gathering in of these sensations. It's the site of experience. And experience happens, I want to suggest, where it's happened to me, and I've learned to think of it this way. And it's hard to shake this. It happens in the first person, at the body, in the consciousness. I'm just describing kind of habits of thought, presuppositions about what it means to be alive as a human being. I want to share a phrase that dative of manifestation. Right? It kind of shifts the thinking about experience happening in the first person. And if you've studied German or Russian or Latin or some other language that has cases, dative is a case. That's a grammatical term. And I'll just give an example of something in the dative. It's going to be in English, so we don't actually use the dative, but the sentence, she gave the book to her friend. She is in the nominative, right? That's the subject. You have gave, that's the verb. The book would be in the accusative case. That's the direct object. And then her friend. The book is what is given. That's the accusative. The friend receives the action of the giving. The dative refers to this reception of the action of the verb. I threw the ball to him. So that's the dative. Manifestation happens to me. Might think of consciousness as the site where manifestation happens. I like that way of putting it because it kind of sets aside the notion of agency, dative of manifestation. I'll come back to that if I have time. If not, I'm just planting a seed. So body is the site of experience. And we hold sway in our bodies. Here's what I mean by that. My body seems to respond spontaneously to my desires and choices. I can pick up this cup and drink. I don't have to think about it. In fact, if I'm thirsty, I just pick it up and drink. There's this spontaneous responsiveness. And this is from simple acts like looking around, adjusting our position in a chair, or lying down to go to sleep. And they're also seemingly automatic, but actually, I mean, these are somewhat complex, but then they're seemingly automatic actions or movements, like walking. That's actually quite complex. It takes a long time to learn how to walk, a lot of trial and error. Um, but it's now automatic. We can just walk. But we don't just um, get up and walk like a drone that's being operated by controls in somebody else's hands. Right? We get up and walk because we feel this surge of energy or we have a desire to go somewhere. Or eating. Eating is another complex movement that's now automatic. Right? Um, and of course, there's skills that we acquire later, like playing a musical instrument or dribbling a basketball or knitting a sweater. Right? These things are kind of, we experience these movements spontaneously after we've, learned, struggled with learning to play a musical instrument or dribbling the basketball or knitting a sweater. Once we know how to do these things, we do them with ease. Um, and they're actually, they're literally incorporated, they're built into the body as capacities, personal capacities. I experience capacities as what I can do or what I'm learning to do, and perhaps even what I aspire to do. So I'd learn more things, right? As my capacities grow, I have the sense they can grow more, right? So the sense of my bodily capacity is not just what I already know how to do and do with ease, but it's what I'm learning how to do now. Might still be a struggle, right? How to compose a photograph well, for example. That's a complex bodily action. Um, it also involves thinking, right? Complex. Um, Painting, um, many activities, right? What we're learning to do, and then that gives rise to aspirations. All of this is built into the experience of the body. But we experience this, how I experience this as my capacities, right? What I can do. So the experience of of the body, from sensation to the sense of being capable, is, I want to suggest, interwoven into the experience of the self. In fact, those capacities are one of the ways in which we weave the sense of self. And it makes the experience of the self, myself, concrete. So I'm suggesting that the sense of self arises in the experience of the body here as something distinct from other objects in the world out there. Right? There's always the here where activity is happening, capacities emerge, relationships with the world grow and develop. Right? Because there is a relationship between the two things, the body here, objects in the world out there, but it's a relationship between subject and object, self and world. Okay, so that's part of kind of underlying material out of which the sense of self grows, I want to say. Language, speech, and thought, I'm not going to go into detail about this today, but I do want to mention two things. First, these are conceptual dimensions of human life, and they intensify the sense of separation between subject and object. As a speaker or thinker, I'm here identifying objects, defining them, judging them. It's flow of objects, flow of identifications, and and judgments. Constant flow. Um, and in addition, we regularly tell ourselves stories, right, that maintain a sense of self. These stories, in addition to maintaining the sense of self, they explain the objects we experience and the world in which we live, or the world in which I live, right? And those stories are limitations, they're constraints. I do, however, this is the second thing I want to say. I want to give language, speech, and thought their due because I want to emphasize, because the desire for insight, knowledge, and understanding, that's admirable. Those are beneficial. It's desire for insight, knowledge, and understanding. So, I'm going to read a passage from Aristotle's Metaphysics, the opening lines, because Aristotle does this, brings together this, the bodily and conceptual dimensions of human life together. He brings them together in the opening lines of the Metaphysics, where he says, all human beings by nature stretch themselves out towards knowing, stretching themselves out. It's usually translated as desire, but it's all beings by nature stretch themselves out towards knowing. This is development, growth. A sign of this is our love of the senses, for even apart from their use, they are loved on their own account. And above all the rest, the one through the eyes. For not only in order that we might act, but even when we are not going to act at all, we prefer seeing, one might say, as against everything else. And the cause is that among the senses, this one, seeing, most of all makes us discover things and makes evident many differences. For Aristotle, drawing distinctions is at the heart of philosophy and understanding. And I think there's a real beauty here in this passage from Aristotle, and I think there's a lot to learn from Aristotle. But there's also a dark side, and that is that the desire for control and power is intimately connected to the search for knowledge. It's not necessarily connected, but they're closely associated. And I want to conclude this section on what for me is what I want to emphasize here. This, for me, what I'm emphasizing is my habitual attachment to the self. It's the conceptual dimensions of the attachment, the bodily dimension of the attachment, and the way in which I've really incorporated the sense of self, built it into my life. And then I want to see if I can unpack it, at least a little bit. But I'm going to conclude this section by talking about the most beneficial dimension of the living body. It recedes into the background to situate the world of experience in the foreground. So the question I want to ask for us to pursue is whether the self can recede into the background and what happens when it does. This is the question I want to raise for us to consider as we think about no self or not self. Whether and how the self can recede into the background and what would be in the foreground of our experience if the self were to recede into the background. So I'm going to consider some concrete examples. As I said, concrete examples, starting with newborns, older babies, and preschoolers. I choose these examples because they're truly instances of beginner's mind. Now, I've often said, and people who know me have heard me say this, or at least some people have, that newborn babies are human beings at their wisest. And I say this because the experience of newborns is immediate, unfiltered, and direct. When I watch a newborn, I see the world reflected in its face. The movement of the eyes, the furrowing of the brow reveal wonder, connection, responsiveness. The world and the newborn belong together. There is no separation. Soon, the baby begins actively exploring the world, still without separation. In fact, the unity of baby and world shows up in the exploration itself. The baby experiences the world by putting things in its mouth, coming to know by eliminating the distance between the body and the object. The object is known through incorporation, through putting it into the body. And we have to be careful about that, right? Because babies can choke, right? This is why we have all kinds of, you have to baby proof a house because they will put things right into their mouth. To know them. Now, a few examples from preschoolers. Some of you know that I was a preschool teacher for a year. And of course, that characterization of what I was doing is all wrong because the children were my teachers. They taught me through their actions, and they did so without asserting any authority or making any claims about expertise. Now, they repeated the most important lesson over and over again. Here it is. When an irritating event is over, stop being irritated. It's a simple, wise, and exceedingly difficult lesson. In fact, I keep failing to learn it because I keep telling myself a story about why I'm irritated. It's either a story about me and my irritations, or it's a story about the thing or the person who's irritated me. But the storytelling overwhelms my capacity for equanimity. In other words, the self gets in the way. Here's another lesson the preschoolers taught me. One particular preschooler. Now, at the end of the year, I had to give the children tests. There were actually tests 3 times during the year. The first test was kind of to establish a baseline. The second test in the middle of the year was to see how much the students had learned. And then at the end of the year, there was a final test in this data collection process so the school could see how much the children had learned. Mind you, these are 3- and 4-year-old kids. So I asked one of the students a question while I was doing this data collection. Well, she didn't know the answer. She answered wisely. Mommy knows, she told me. I love this answer because she wasn't troubled by what she didn't know, because she knows that her life is intertwined with people who do know. And she taught me that how we respond to questions or challenges depends on whether and how we understand our lives as distributed across networks, through relationships. In contrast, when we separate ourselves from these relationships or think of ourselves as isolated, independent, and believe that we must be independent, then our lives and capacities are impoverished. Put differently, we suffer when we conceive of ourselves as separate. I'm going to share a third lesson. It occurred when I asked one of the children about a drawing. He told me that it was when he was an apple. This is a complex teaching. First, it is possible to be anything. Being a boy doesn't preclude being an apple, and being an apple doesn't preclude becoming a boy. Second, perception and representation, like drawings or even speech, are acts of imagination. And imaginative acts shouldn't be dismissed as mere fantasies. Imaginative acts are neither willful manifestations of something impossible, nor are they attempts to escape from reality. Instead, reality, whatever that means, might be beyond our comprehension if we dismiss the imagination. Maybe the imagination is an invaluable way of accessing and understanding the interconnected world of which we are a part. The last thing I want to say about this lesson is that I'm working too hard to make sense of the event. Or I might be working too hard. It's probably better to think of it as a koan, I cannot understand what I was told about the drawing if I hold on to my assumptions about how the world works. Okay. So I'll summarize here by saying that babies are babies and preschoolers are concrete examples of beginner's mind. Babies live without fixed ideas, beliefs, assumptions. And for the most part, preschoolers are also free of these burdens, these sources of suffering. Their lives provide important clues for answering the question I posed earlier, whether the self can recede into the background and what happens if it does. Not only can their lives show us that it's possible to live without a commitment to self, they can teach us that we once lived without the encumbrance of a self. If we can learn that lesson, we might recognize how much suffering the commitment to self brings. Two analogies come to mind. First, the self is our baggage, and our commitment to ourself is the handle we use to hold on to that baggage. Second, the self is like a flood. It overwhelms the capacity for equanimity. It disrupts or destroys what it touches, and it leaves behind a sediment that makes insight nearly impossible. In some, the commitment to self is a primary source of delusion because it's a wellspring of greed and hatred. Now, I realize that there were passages from different texts on right view that I wanted to share. For the sake of time, I want to just share, I'm going to share just a few. This comes from Bhikkhu Bodhi's book on the Noble Eightfold Path, and it's on right view. He says that the importance of right view can be gauged from the fact that our perspectives on the crucial issues of reality and value have a bearing that goes beyond mere theoretical convictions. They govern our attitudes, our actions, our whole orientation to existence. Our views might not be clearly formulated in our mind. We might have only a hazy conceptual grasp of our beliefs, but whether formulated or not, expressed or maintained in silence, these views have a far-reaching influence. They structure our perceptions, order our values, crystallize into the ideational framework through which we interpret to ourselves the meaning of our being in the world. And he points out that views imply an ontological commitment, a decision on the question of what is real and true. One of the things I want to stress here is that we have an ontological commitment to the self. And it arises through, I want to suggest, our experience of the body and our conceptual abilities, our understanding of ourselves as subjects and agents. Now, what we really are aggregates. These aggregates, the five aggregates, that's material form, feelings, material form, perceptions, feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, mental formations, speech, thought, ideas, and consciousness. These constituent factors of our being are always changing, utterly devoid of permanent core, There is nothing we can cling to in them as a basis of security. There is only a constantly disintegrating flux, which, when clung to in the desire for permanence, brings a plunge into suffering. And if there were more time, I would share some quotes from Thich Nhat Hanh. But I'm going to end there with the suggestion that we should think of not self or no self as a strategy, not something to be learned conceptually, although there's a lot of conceptual teaching about it, but a strategy for the relief of suffering. So when no self is understood as a strategy, what first comes into view, in right view, are the Four Noble Truths. And here I will quote from Bhikkhu Bodhi, who says, the Buddha defines the path factor of right view expressly in terms of the Four Truths. What now is right view? It is understanding of suffering, understanding of the origin of suffering, understanding of the cessation of suffering, understanding of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And I'll just share how Thich Nhat Hanh puts that, and then I'll stop. He says, the first practice of the Noble Eightfold Path is right view. Right view is, first of all, a deep understanding of the Four Noble Truths. Our suffering, the making of our suffering, the fact that our suffering can be transformed, and the path of transformation. The Buddha said that right view is to have faith and confidence that there are people who have been able to transform their suffering. Venerable Shariputra added that right view is knowing which of the four kinds of nutriments that we have ingested have brought about what has come to be. So what I want to suggest is that when we think about no self, or this is what I would suggest, when you think about no self and you struggle with it, think about beginner's mind, setting aside fixed ideas, presuppositions, assumptions, and think about right view. And in particular, the source of our suffering and the cessation of our suffering, which is in large part the self and the attachments and aversions associated with the self. Now, I'll stop there. And I thank you for your patience.